Hey everybody. Well, today we're going to continue on with the bloopers that I found in the TV show Lost in Space. Now, this is going to cover Season 2, and Season 2 had some changes that occurred. Namely, the show went to color, which is fantastic. It was great to see the show in color. A few things were kind of modified. They got new costumes, new suits to wear. They finally got to leave that planet. The robot got a complete overhaul. They added some color to him. They cleaned him up. They remolded his legs so they looked a lot better because in the first season they looked pretty rough. So there's a bunch of bloopers in these episodes. So we're going to go ahead and start with Season 2. In the first episode, which is called Blastoff into Space, we get to see everybody's costumes in color for the first time. And interestingly enough, they decided to use the robot's ears, the little red and yellow sensors near the top of his head. They started to turn them on again, the little motors inside, to make them spin. So after the first few episodes of the first season of The Lost in Space, all the little things that moved in the robot's bubble and his ears, they decided to stop using those because the motors made so much noise that Bob May, the actor inside of the robot, couldn't hear his lines. And then they had to go back and also redub a lot of the other actors' lines because the motors would get picked up on the microphone. So they decided to scrap it. Now, here it is, the first episode of Season 2, and it looked like they were trying to, maybe see if they could, at least get the ears to work. So I'll show you real quick. Here you can kind of see how they're spinning right there, but it doesn't last very long. After the first couple of minutes, the robot's ear sensors stopped turning. So for whatever reason, I think they were just experimenting to see if they could use them, and then they just decided not to use them. It's kind of odd. You wouldn't see them turn again until, I think, the very last episode of the entire series, which was called Junkyard in Space in Season 3, and you very briefly get to see the red one spinning really quick. Now, Irwin Allen was known for, shall we say his cheapness when it came to the budget on a lot of these shows. And so he would reuse a lot of props over and over. Now, you'll notice that little red thing on the drill, this thing right here. Now, in one of my videos, I did a little model of the Proteus from the movie Fantastic Voyage. It was a really cool movie. And in that movie, there's a snorkel device that they pull out of the Proteus, the ship, in order to get air out of the man's lungs when they were inside that man's body. Well, this is the exact same prop. This red thing right here was the snorkel that was used on the Proteus. And it's funny how they reused it as the drilling tip or the drilling device for this. And it shows up quite frequently in the show. I think it was even in the first season, but we didn't get to see it in color until now. And it was red in the movie as well. So you'll see as the show went on, so many props were reused over and over. It's pretty funny. Now, this scene never made any sense to me. They're in the middle of this climactic departure of the planet. The planet's falling apart. There's all these explosions going on. The Jupiter 2 is getting engulfed in flames. And then Dr. Smith reveals that he had stolen the thruster control and gave it to Nerem, the Struther Martin character, the miner that we saw at the beginning of this episode. And so she tells Dr. Smith and Will to unstrap themselves from the couch to go up to the upper level to tell the father. So they get unbuckled from these couches as all this, stuff is going on in turbulence. I just don't understand why the mother would tell them to do it. All she had to do was just get on the intercom and, tell them from there. She was just on the intercom talking to John. So it doesn't make any sense that she would make these guys get out of their couches just to go tell John that Dr. Smith took the thruster controller. Now, this special effects scene wasn't actually supposed to be in the final cut. This was actually a blooper, because if you watch it, the bottom part of the Jupiter 2 is actually coming loose. It actually is coming off. You can actually see how it's not attached, and the light stopped spinning. There's only the one light that's on there. So somebody screwed up and used some blooper footage in there that wasn't supposed to be in there, but it's kind of weird to see it. Now, this is episode 2, and it's called Wild Adventure, and in this scene, Dr. Smith pulled the robot's power pack because he was going to tell on him when Dr. Smith was trying to convince Penny to go up to the top level and change the astrogator location, like the coordinates. And so he pulls the power pack right here, and you can see that the robot isn't really leaning over all that much. But in the following scene, we can see that he's leaning over quite a bit. So while Dr. Smith gets impatient waiting for Penny to come back, he decides that he's going to put the power pack back into the robot. Now, when you put the power pack on the robot, there's 3 prongs on it, and sometimes it takes a little bit of doing to get it on there. But as you can see here, Dr. Smith, if you look at his left hand, he doesn't actually even have the power pack in his hand right there. He acts like he's going to put the power pack back into the robot, and then as soon as he does, the lights come on and the robot gets activated. But he actually never had. See how the lights come on to the robot right there? And now he's activated perfectly fine. So they did it so that they could save time, so that Jonathan Harris didn't have to kind of fumble around to get the power pack on. But it's funny that you can actually see he never actually had the power pack in his hand all along. Now, in this episode, we get introduced to Athena, the green girl, the girl from the green dimension, and she would show up later on in the series. And there's a scene here where the robot comes up the elevator. So you can see the elevator back here. Now, the robot is right here. You can just see him right here, and he's actually walking around the astrogator. So Bob May is wearing the Bermuda shorts. That's what he fondly called the costume when they took the tread section off and he could walk around in it. If you look closely right here, you can actually see Bob's foot and his pant leg. He's wearing some green pants right there. So if I go frame by frame here, you'll actually see his foot, and you can see the bottom of the robot's leg. See how you can actually see where the rubber part cuts off, and you can see where Bob's leg is sticking out. So it's pretty cool. It wasn't supposed to be seen, obviously, but as he's walking around there, you can actually see his foot sticking out. It's a really cool blooper. Now, this is episode 3, and it's called The Ghost Planet. And at the very beginning of the episode, the robot is actually burning up, as you can see here. But if you look closely, you can actually see the tape that's on the top of his body here and here. I think that's where they put the little spark charges on there to make it look like that he's sparking. So, I mean, it's pretty visible, but it's kind of weird that they would actually do that and maybe possibly damage the robot. But maybe they didn't. I mean, I bet the robot was repainted so many times because of all the things that they had to do to him. Now, in this episode is when they decided that they were going to change the robot's buttons midway through the episode. Now, if you look at the buttons right here, they have kind of like a faint look to them. You can't really, I mean, you can see that, it's supposed to be the orange, green, red, green, orange look, but it's not even green on the second row and the fourth row. And two of them are out right here for whatever reason, but they almost have kind of a pastel look to it. But then all of a sudden, the buttons change and look more refined. So in this later scene, now you can see how the buttons are much more refined right here. Now you can definitely see the orange, green, red, green, orange pattern, and they look more solid. They don't have that kind of faded out or pastel look. And if you watch this episode, it kind of alternates back and forth. So you can kind of tell which episodes were filmed before, or which scenes were filmed before the other scenes. So I think this is how the buttons would look from now on, is with this refined look. So whenever you saw the scenes where the robot had the more faded out buttons, those scenes were actually filmed earlier. But it's kind of funny how they decided to just upgrade the buttons in the middle of the episode. Once Dr. Smith enters the cave, we get introduced to this lady robot, and you can see that they have these drones kind of guys that are kind of back here, and you'll notice the masks they're wearing are really shiny. But in the next scene here, in the background, all of a sudden they look more dull. You can see that they've dulled these masks down. It's almost like they sprayed them down with like a dull coat or something. And it's probably because they were like a mirror finish before, and you could actually see reflections of the lights and stuff like that, and maybe even possibly some of the crew. So it's kind of funny how they dulled them down in the very next scene. Now, the robot was never designed to turn while he's rolling around. He could only go forward and backward. So in this scene, they came up with some kind of a rig that the robot was actually standing on. If you look closely under the tread section, it looks like there's some wood or something that he's standing on. And also, Will Robinson is right behind this statue, but the robot is particularly taller in this scene because, see, there's Will. You can see how much taller he is than normal, and that's because he's on this platform. Also, right here is some debris that is caught up on his tow cable, and you can clearly see the tow cable that pulls him along. But you can also see the platform that he's standing on right there. So that's how they were able to make him turn. It's probably like some casters or something and they were able to make him turn better that way. But it's pretty funny how you can see the tow cable in there. Now in this scene, Dr. Smith, Will, and the robot are making their daring escape to get out of this cave and get away from those drones. But if you watch Dr. Smith and Will, they're trying not to trip over the robot's tow cable. So here you'll see the robot is back on that platform that allows him to turn. But now see how Bill Mumy is trying not to get caught up on the cables? And then Jonathan Harris also is trying not to get caught up on him either. But they can't see because of the mist that's on the ground. Here you can see the robot is actually turning. So it's kind of funny how they kind of had to struggle in this scene to not get caught up in the robot's tow cables. Now, this was another one of those scenes where they couldn't dub over Bob May's actual voice. Bob May that did the voice of the robot on set, and then they would later dub over his voice with Dick Tufeld, the announcer of the show. Now, you'll notice Dr. Smith, Will, and the robot are running down here. Now, notice how the robot's neon is on. If you watch his neon, you'll know when Bob May is saying his lines, and he's going on this tirade about something, and the only thing I can understand is at the very end he says something about destroy, but you can see or hear that it's actually Bob May's actual voice. It's so weird to hear Bob May's voice actually coming out of there, and it's really neat, and they couldn't fix it because of all the stuff going on. I guess they probably could have dubbed over and had the actors loop their lines of yelling and screaming, but it may not have matched their mouths, so it was kind of unavoidable. This scene comes right after, and we have the same issue where everybody's talking at the same time. So once again, watch the robot's neon and try to listen to the voice that comes on at the same time as neon does, and you can hear Bob May saying things like, danger, danger, leave at once. So you'll be able to hear his actual voice once again. Now, this is episode 4, and it's titled Forbidden World, and in the beginning, there's a scene where Will goes into this utility room, which, by the way, this utility room would keep changing throughout the series. Sometimes it's a storage closet, sometimes it's a weapons locker, and then in the 3rd season, it mysteriously became the space pod storage area, or like where they entered the space pod, which had no explanation whatsoever as to how that appeared, but it's just kind of funny. But anyway, if you look at the shadow right here, this is the shadow of one of the prop guy's hands when he handed Bill Mumy the fire extinguisher. You can kind of see his hand go away right there, but he had actually handed Will the fire extinguisher, and it's kind of cool that you can actually see the shadow of his hand there. Once again, in this episode, we see this spider prop being used again. We saw this once before in the 1st season, and it was gigantic. It was bigger than the chariot. But in this episode, it's more of just a giant spider. And then it's the same prop as I mentioned in the video discussing the bloopers from season 1. It's the same prop that was used in the Gilligan's Island episode. So it's funny how they reused the same prop. But yep, that's the same spider once again. Skipping ahead to the episode called Prisoners in Space. Now this is where the Jupiter 2 crew is being held responsible for space crimes, and so they have to go to this court to answer for their crimes. Now, there's this fence that appears around their campsite. Now, if you watch the sand, each time one of the segments of the fence appear, look at the sand, and you'll see how it shifts. See how it's pieces and parts of it shift each time another segment of the fence appears? That's because the prop guys had to set up each fence post, and then they would, pause it, and then it's like, like kind of like the thing they do for I Dream of Jeannie when things appear and disappear. So it's unavoidable because, I mean, you're going to have the crew walking through the sand like that. And even if they tried to rake it or make it look smooth, you're still going to see how the sand changes. But it's cool how you can actually see their footprints change the sand formations. So in this episode, which is called The Deadly Games of Gamma 6, I'm not really sure you'd call this a blooper, but when Bill Mumy goes into the cage to pick up the robot's power pack, the door closes behind him in this cage, and when he looks at it, you can kind of tell he's not sure which bar to push on to open the gate, and he gets a little mixed up. It's very brief, but you can see here he grabs the wrong bar and then he walks out. So he recovers very nicely, trying to figure out which one it was. I mean, he played it off really well. Now, this is from The Thief from Outer Space, and it's not really a blooper so much as an observation. So when Will walks up to this thing, it's like a little space-age transporter type of thing. there's a special effect of this massively huge explosion, and that's actually Bill Mumy. It is not a stunt person, and I'm really surprised that they actually let him do this. I mean, in this day and age, they would never let a child actor stand in front of a massive explosion like we have in this scene. And here we see the massive explosion that they set off, a bunch of charges that they did. And I mean, he's pretty much engulfed in, sparks and I'm not really sure if there's so much flame in there, but I mean, you can really see that. Poor Bill Mumy. I mean, you can see he really does react to that. He's really close to it. And I'm really surprised that they actually had him stand in front of that. It's pretty wild. Now, this episode is called The Curse of Cousin Smith, and I really like this episode, but what's a little bit of interesting trivia about this, now this is from what I understand, I think I read it somewhere or a couple different places. So at this point in time, Jonathan Harris, he knew that he was pretty much the king of the show. I mean, he pretty much took the show over at this point. He was even rewriting scripts so that he could get more lines and, and everything else. At this point, he was also constantly, well, I don't know if it was constant, but he would frequently bother Irwin Allen about getting more money. He wanted to be paid more. And I think Irwin Allen kind of got tired of it. And so just to prove to Jonathan Harris that they could replace him if they needed to, they introduced this character of Cousin Smith. Now, this character was played by the actor Henry Jones. And if you watch this episode, it is different because Jonathan Harris isn't in it as much as he normally is in all the episodes. And so I think Irwin Allen wanted to prove that to Jonathan Harris that, hey, we can replace you by introducing this Cousin Smith character and easily, have the Dr. Smith character knocked off or left somewhere. And I think it was just kind of he was trying to teach Jonathan Harris a lesson a little bit. From what I understand, I think I read it in a couple of different publications of behind the scenes of Lost in Space. And so I think at this point, he never asked for a raise again after that. Now, in this scene, Cousin Smith is going to plant a bomb in this pie because they're going to be taking these things over to Dr. Smith, who's hiding in a cave because he's scared of Cousin Smith. So the consummate actor that Henry Jones is, he plays this off pretty well. He's winding up, you can see in his hands, he's got this device, and he's winding it up. And by the sound of it, it kind of reminds me of the old joy buzzers that we used to be able to buy at the local 7-Eleven or drugstore, the little pranks, and they're made of metal. And so he's winding it up. And as he winds it up, you can hear it kind of buzz. It goes bzz, and you can see that Henry Jones actually gets a little startled, and then he says, "Not yet, you fool." And I think that it wasn't supposed to do that, but being a good actor like he was, he played it off really well. Not yet, you fool. And so I think he did a good job. It wasn't supposed to do that, but he did it really well. This episode was called West of Mars, and it was Jonathan Harris's favorite episode, and probably because he got to play dual roles, and also he got to play Zeno, the fastest space swift, as he was called, like a mean character. So I think he really enjoyed that. But what was kind of odd about this episode too is they had to create this this western town set, and I'm sure that it was strictly just to save money. But if you look at all the set pieces here, see how the walls don't even connect to anything? It's just a wall, and same thing with the ones in the background. And so it's kind of cool how they decided to cheap out by not making the full sets, strictly to save money. But at the same time, it kind of gives a certain kind of imagery to this setting and this episode, which I think really works. So in a way, that while they were trying to save money, it was kind of a clever way to just kind of give the episode a certain feel. Skipping ahead now to the episode called Wreck of the Robot, which is one of my favorite episodes from the entire series. Now, in this room, in this cave, they reuse a ton of different props that were shown in different episodes. These things back here will show up several times in the future. This disc right here was part of the Android machine, the ordering machine we saw earlier. And this thing right in front was actually the remnants of the lady robot that we saw in the Ghost Planet. And that green thing in the background, that's actually the special effects miniature that they used for the space station. And I think it was part of the derelict as well. It's like the top half of it. But it actually gets used in a few other episodes too. And it's funny how they actually use the filming special effects miniatures as props in the background. In this scene, there's a bit of a continuity error. As we can see, the robot is just right behind June Lockhart, and she's even close enough that she can actually touch him. But in the far shot, we can see that the robot is significantly further behind her, so they really don't match up. So one of the light bulbs in the robot's bubble must have burnt out, and then the prop guys had to go in and change it. But unfortunately, they didn't put a blinker bulb in it, so the robot uses those old-style blinker bulbs that after you first turn them on, they stay lit for a little bit, and then the little element inside heats up, and each bulb starts to blink at its own pace. But if you look at the light right there, throughout different parts of the episode, that light stays lit solid, and it just kind of stands out and it looks a little weird. So they probably put that bulb in, realized that it wasn't a blinker bulb, and they just went ahead and went with it. And in this scene, the bulb is completely burnt out. You can see it right there. And so throughout the scene, that stays dark. So they must have replaced the bulb right in the middle of the episode. Another interesting thing to note is if you look closely at the robot's claw right here, see those two holes that are drilled into it? That was the result of the episode The Android Machine when Verta was taking his pointer away from him when the robot was doing lessons for the kids. He had a little tube that was screwed into his claw right there so that the pointer would fit in there, and that's where they attached it. So apparently they actually drilled holes into the robot's claws to achieve that. In the following episode, this one is called The Dream Monster, and the guest star was John Abbott. There on the right, he plays the character Sesmar. And from what I saw or read somewhere, he actually didn't care for Jonathan Harris. He thought he had a silly acting style. And so even though he was a guest star on here, he wasn't really impressed with Jonathan Harris. So there's kind of a cool blooper in this scene. So as Don and Dr. Smith are running after they were handcuffed, we see Sesmar taking a nap right here. Now, Radion was the gold android that was in this episode. He was played by Dawson Palmer, who was a tall guy. He played many of the aliens on this show. Now, if you look down here at this corner right here, you'll see Dawson Palmer's leg kind of come out because he was about ready to come out too soon. And so I'll show you what that looks like right here. All right, so you can kind of see his foot come out very briefly. So yeah, I think he kind of forgot that he had to wait for his cue. Now this episode is called The Golden Man, and as the robot walks into the cave, once again we see props being reused over and over. In fact, this big piece right here will be later used as the robot's diode timer when in the episode Trip Through the Robot. This thing up here in the corner will be seen in Trip Through the Robot as well as the robot's missile launchers. And then once again here we see the female robot being used as a background prop as well. And once again we see this green thing right here. That was the miniature that was used for the space station, the special effects miniature, and it's also the thing we just got done seeing in the Wreck of the Robot episode. So it's kind of funny how they just keep using the same stuff. Oh, and this thing right here, right there, that was the, in the Prisoners of Space episode, that was the communication device that was used. And up here, we can actually see the table. This was the killer device that was used in the episode, The Deadly Games of Gamma 6. And this would be reused in other TV shows as well. And once again, the show's cheap budget rears its ugly head in this episode because down here we can see that these things here, they're just beach balls. They're supposed to be these bombs that are in the ground or like landmines, but all they are is those cheap little beach balls that we used to blow up and play with when we were kids. Now this blooper is really cool. During the big battle between Mr. Kima and that frog creature, which I forget his name now, we can really see how this set is made. It's a big surround stage, but what's really cool is if you look in the background here, see these, see the mountains? See how they're just cardboard cutouts? You can see the shadow of them. Because of this big flash here, you can actually see the shadow being cast on the back painted wall. But now you can see the roundness of this entire set. You can see how it just kind of is just a big round thing. And then they have these hills that kind of go up towards these, you know, like cardboard mountains. And so because of this angle, I mean, I'm sure they just wanted to get a big view of this, but unfortunately it really gives away the whole image of the set. It's kind of neat how you can actually see how the mountains are just cardboard and how the set is just kind of a small round set. In this scene, this is after the robot got zapped by Mr. Kima, And so he's kind of acting weird and spinning around in circles. And if you look closely on his torso right here, you can see this little clear strap right there. And that's what's making him spin. They're just kind of turning him using that strap. And on the close-up, you can really see it. It's really visible right along here. And you can even see where it goes across the neon right there. So it's pretty cool. Skipping a few episodes ahead now, this is titled Rocket to Earth, and we had Al Lewis as a guest star, Grandpa Munster himself. And in this episode, Bob May got to kind of get double duty. I think he probably enjoyed this because it was something different. So in the scenes where we see this dummy right here, the robot's not really doing any moving. If he is, then they probably have somebody else operating the puppet. But Bob May is actually doing the voice of the puppet, so you can actually hear what he sounds like. And so, yeah, he's probably down inside of this vase operating this puppet, and he actually gets to do 2 roles in this episode. Now, this episode is called Cave of the Wizards, and I really like this episode, and I believe this was one of Jonathan Harris's favorite episodes as well, because he got to play a really bizarre character. But once again, they use, even the special effects models are being used as props in the background. So if you notice right here, that is the big, huge Jupiter 2 model, special effects filming model that they used. I think that's the one that actually has the working landing gear on it. And so here it is. They're using it as just a prop in the background. It's pretty wild. This is another thing that's amazing about this episode, is that they actually went to the trouble of painting the entire robot gold. It's so unusual to see the robot in this gold color, and it looks really cool. The Diamond Select toy was based on this episode, and it's called Golden Boy because he says he prefers to be called Golden Boy. So it's pretty cool, but it's pretty amazing that the prop guys had to go through all this trouble and, mask off the chest area and paint the entire robot gold. It's pretty incredible they were able to do all that. In this scene, I always thought it was kind of cool because Will comes back to the cave to come say goodbye to Dr. Smith and the robot because they're under such influence of the alien that they're probably going to be stuck on this planet. So the robot tells Will that he can autograph his suit of gold. So if you watch that vent right here in the front, you'll see that it actually opens right about here, and then he reaches down to get the pen. That's really cool. I think that it's neat that Bob May did that. And actually, I never even noticed it the first few times that I saw this episode. Another interesting thing that occurs in this episode is that we actually get to see Dr. Smith ride the robot, and it's kind of cool. I mean, nobody's ever done it, as you can see. And actually, that I don't even think that's Jonathan Harris. I think that's actually a stunt actor because Jonathan Harris was always kind of skittish about doing any kind of thing like that. He actually gets on the robot at the beginning, but once it starts moving, you can see that he's purposely hiding his face. But it's really neat. You never see anybody ride the robot like that in any other episode except this one. Now, this episode is called Treasure of the Lost Planet. It's another, I love this episode. I think it's pretty cool. Now, Jonathan Harris, he had fallen down this pit. It was like an elevator, it dropped straight down. But it's funny because when he comes out of the pit, you can clearly tell that he is stepping on some stairs to get back up, which weren't there when he fell down there. Here's another unusual thing that we get to see with the robot. So if you look at his front vent right there, you'll have there'll be like a little component that he has come down, and Bob May can actually grip it with his claw right there. See how he actually drops that thing and he can actually grip that component. So once again, he can do amazing things in that robot. In this episode, we see the return of Captain Alonso P. Tucker. And I really liked Captain Tucker. We were first introduced to him in the first season, and then he returns for this one. And he befriended the Robinsons. He was a great character. Now the actor that played him was Albert Salmi. And if you Google him, you can read about him. But unfortunately, he had a very tragic end to his life. He was estranged from his second wife, and apparently he had killed her. I guess they had gotten into an argument or something, and then he took his own life right after that. I guess one of his friends found both of them dead in their house. It was really sad and really tragic. It's too bad because I really thought he was a good actor, and I really liked his character on this show. Now, this episode is called Revolt of the Androids. It's the episode where the famous crush, kill, destroy comes from. And in this scene, Dawson Palmer plays the meaner IDAC android, and he gets into a fight with the robot here. and he accidentally hits the robot a little too hard, and he ends up kind of hitting over in the collar section of the robot. So right here. So let me zoom in on that, and I'll show you what I mean. Now watch as the IDAC android hits the robot, and he accidentally knocks out 2 or 3 pieces of the collar. Right there, you can see one flying off right there, and then another one goes flying off near the top of his bubble. See it flying right there? So there are pieces of acrylic that are just glued in there to make his collar, but you can see that he didn't mean to hit the collar and break it, but he did, and even Dawson Palmer almost has a look on his face like, oops. Pretty funny. At the end of the episode, the robot reactivates himself, and as he's pulling his arms back in, the front vent down here at the bottom right there, keep an eye on that. I'll zoom in on it because the vent actually falls off. It falls out of there. Okay, so I'll go frame by frame and you'll be able to see it. I was hoping that pause thing would get out of the way, but here you'll see the front vent. There it goes. It actually falls out. God, that's so funny. I love it. I love that kind of stuff. Now, this episode is called Trip Through the Robot, and it's a really cool episode. The robot grows massively huge, and now Will and Dr. Smith have to go inside the robot to reverse his ionic process to make him come back down to normal size. So they pulled out every prop and set piece that they could find that they've reused over and over to make the interior of the robot. Now this piece back here, it's pretty interesting. It was the robot's diode timer. It's basically his heart. Now the movie Fantastic Voyage was being filmed, or I think it just got done being filmed, right at the time this episode was being filmed. They were both on 20th Century Fox's lot. And so I guess Irwin Allen happened to find a stash of all the props and set pieces from that movie and stole them to use in this show. And that's why this thing looks like a bunch of veins and stuff, since that movie was about people being miniaturized going inside of a human body. So it's kind of cool that they were able to use that piece. Okay, now this episode is probably my favorite episode of the entire series. Now, this episode is called The Mechanical Men, and I love it because the robot is in it a lot, but what's so cool is that the prop guys must have had a heyday with this episode. They must have hit up every local store in the area and bought every Remco toy robot that they could possibly find. I think they bought about 50 for this episode. Now, I did a review video of the Diamond Select Lost in Space robots, and I briefly show my Remco toy robot that I had, ever since I was a kid, and it's very personal to me to have that because we weren't very well off when I was a kid, and these toys were kind of expensive back in the day, and for my parents to have been able to get me one for Christmas was pretty special, and I still have him, and he's practically in mint condition. I've taken very good care of him. So now, as you can see here, the prop guys had to customize all of these. They painted them silver so that they matched the robot on the show. Some of them have motorized arms that kind of move back and forth and in and out, and they also motorized some of the torso so that the upper half of the robot turns back and forth. And then they have this little guy here. He's the purple one. He's the leader. And so these guys are from the planet Industro, which is so funny. But what's cool is if you look at the back of this purple robot, see that little black area right there? That was where the little mechanisms where you'd squeeze the two pieces together to make the robot's arms open and close. And so they just removed that and filled it in. And then down at the bottom of the tread section, you can kind of see the on and off knob that you'd pull out to turn them on. And then there's a little lever on the left side, I believe, that would make the robot turn left or right when he ran. So it's kind of cool how they just kind of modified it. But this is really cool how they actually bought so many of these robots to make this episode. And here you can see how some of them move. And then look how many there are there. And there's the purple robot on his pedestal. It's so cool. On the Blu-ray, there's some really cool behind-the-scenes footage and test footage of some of the special effects shots throughout the throughout the whole series, but they also have some really cool behind-the-scenes footage of how they made these guys roll like that. They're all being pulled by threads, but it's really cool. Now, there is a blooper that does occur in this episode. So the robot and Dr. Smith have their personalities exchanged in this episode. So the Dr. Smith is in the robot, and the robot is in Dr. Smith. And so when the robot talks, he sounds like Dr. Smith. Now, John here asks the robot, "What can I do for you?" And the robot, in Dr. Smith's voice, he incorrectly answers, "As a matter of fact, there is." And so I think it went over most people's heads, but if you listen to it here, you'll see what I mean.
Nice of you to drop in. What can we do for you? As a matter of fact, there is. You and your
Okay,
family can be.
so there you can see that he actually answered incorrectly. So, since Dr. Smith had to dub over these lines, he was, probably just given the wrong line. Maybe they meant to say, maybe John was supposed to say, "Is there something we can do for you?" So somehow that got mixed up, and it doesn't really sound right, but I think most people probably didn't even notice it. Now, this episode is called The Astral Traveler, and the character there is called Hamish. And he comes waving this torch to scare off the creature that's in the water. But if you watch, he almost hits Bill Mooney with the torch a couple of times, and you'll see it right here. And Bill has to duck out of the way. It's pretty crazy. So, I mean, the actor obviously didn't know that he was getting that close to Bill Mooney. And I'm sure that he would have been more careful, but it's just, I don't know. When I first saw that, I was like, man, he almost hit Bill Mooney with that. This episode was called The Galaxy Gift, and it was actually the last episode of season 2. Now, Jonathan Harris, he made it no secret that he did not enjoy working with John Carradine. John Carradine is the one on the left. Now, I guess when John Carradine came on the set to film for the week, the cast always tried to welcome guest stars because they, wanted to make them feel comfortable. So Jonathan Harris came up to John Carradine and said, "Hello, my name is Jonathan Harris. I'm looking forward to working with you this week." And I think John Carradine said something to the effect of, "Look, I'm here to just do the work. I'm not here to make friends." And I guess that just immediately, kind of set the tone for the rest of the week. I don't think some of the other people enjoyed working with him either. And I think I read somewhere he was on some other show where some of the people didn't have too favorable of things to say about him there either. So apparently he just wasn't a pleasant person to work with. It's, kind of a shame to hear that kind of a thing, but I guess that's just kind of the way he was. Oddly enough, Guy Williams and Mark Goddard aren't seen anywhere in this episode, so for whatever reason, they either took the week off or needed the week off, but they're not seen in this episode at all, and it's kind of strange. So there we go, some bloopers, trivia, and oddities that we saw in Season 2 of Lost in Space. So Season 2 used to be my favorite season, but I think I actually like Season 3 better. There are some really good episodes in Season 2, but there's a couple that I really don't like. The one called The Questing Beast, I'm not a fan of that one, and I'm not really a fan of The Thief from Outer Space either. For some reason, those episodes just don't do much for me, but there is some good ones in there. By this time, I think the robot was getting so much fan mail that they decided to start putting the robot in more of the stories, and some of them were specific just to him, and we could definitely see that in Season 2, and I think that's pretty cool, because he was my favorite character as well. But anyway, it's really fun going through these bloopers, and I hope you're enjoying all of these as well. I'll get busy working on the Season 3 blooper video. These things take a long time to make. I think I spent the last 2 or 3 days making this thing, because I have to go through all these episodes, but it is a lot of fun to do. So I hope you're enjoying it. And if you are, please hit the like button and also subscribe too. I'd really appreciate that. So I will see you on the next video. Thank you so much for watching and have a good one.